We're glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Well, so you and I have had a number of conversations over the years about education. And what I want to talk about today is sort of what comes next for our kids, which is work. So you said it in your interview a little while ago, and you say it all the time. You want to make Mississippi the most job-friendly state in the nation. Why does meaningful work matter so much to our people?
Well, thank you, Grant, for having me, and thanks to everyone in the crowd. Great crowd today. Appreciate y'all being here, and this is really a great opportunity for folks from all around our state to sit around and think about what can we do to continue to see the kind of market improvements that we've seen in our state over the last 10 years, particularly when it comes to education. Look, work is essential. Giving kids and young adults an opportunity to provide for themselves and provide for their families is essential to having an economy that works, but also having the kind of quality of life that we want here in our state. And I think one of the great things that we're seeing yesterday with the grand opening of the new facility in the Oxford School District, for instance, something that I know you have Dr. Childress on a panel in a little while, that he has done such a phenomenal job of in the Corinth School District, is recognizing that getting these individuals that are in the pre-K through 12 system ready to move on to college is part of the deal, but getting a large segment of them also ready to move on to the workforce is also a large part of what they are trying to accomplish. And so work is so important to self-worth, to providing not only for yourself, but providing for your family. And it's the reason that we spend so much time talking about workforce development, and workforce development goes hand in hand with economic development. Because in the old days, I'll tell you, when I first started in the world of government, and I've been around a while, and some people across the state, and maybe even some in this room would probably say that I've been involved in government too long. But the reality is, when I first started, and when we talked to potential prospects about investing capital in our state, the first question that was always asked was about incentives. How much? What are you going to give us to move here? While that still plays a role, the real question now is, tell me about your workforce. Tell me how I'm going to hire the number of people that I need to produce the product that I produce, and how am I going to get it to the marketplace? That's the question now. And it's one of the reasons that we're winning a lot now, is because we've proven, particularly throughout the pandemic, an ability for our people to get up and go to work.
So you mentioned the pandemic. One of the things that set our state apart was, while states across the country were shuttering businesses, closing things down, you focused on not only lives, but livelihoods. Why was it so important to you to keep our businesses open during the pandemic?
Well, again, it's about valuing work, and it's about recognizing that so many people in our state don't have large savings accounts wherein they can be off of work for a day or a week, much less a month or two or three, and still provide for their families. And so I will tell you, during the pandemic, and I was just with a large group of my fellow Republican governors last week, and we talked a lot about some of the decisions that we had to make throughout 2020 and 2021, and the conversations that we had. And one of the things that struck me was clearly I had an understanding of the levers of power of government coming into this office. But my background, coming from a family who's had a small family-run business my entire life, my father, who I had the pleasure of seeing yesterday, started his small business in the early 1970s, and unfortunately, he went through the early years of that business in the construction space at a time when Jimmy Carter was president. Inflation was at levels unheard of. It seems like we're heading in that direction again now under this administration. But having that background of knowing a small business owner, knowing what it's like to sign the front side of a paycheck, and recognizing that every small business is essential to that small business owner. And every small business is essential to every one of those employees that work for that business who depend upon it to provide food for their families. And so I think my background coming in certainly helped with that and helped realize it. And trying to balance that scenario between protecting lives and livelihoods is one that has proven. It was not guaranteed, by the way, when we were making these decisions in 2020, but it has proven that approach is the right approach. When you look at number of jobs recovered, for instance, since the pandemic began, and the reality is 95% of the top 20 states in America leading the charge in terms of total jobs recovered since the pandemic are all run by governors who happen to be of our political party, but also governors who focused on protecting both lives and livelihoods. When you look at unemployment rates, for instance, the lowest, some 90 to 95% of the lowest unemployment rates in America in the top 20 to 25 states are all run by governors of our political party. And so the reality is it is proven, at least in this 2-year period, that has been the case. And as it specifically relates to Mississippi, at our peak, Mississippi had 240,000 unemployment claims in 1 week. The most recent data a week or two ago, we had less than 5,000 today. Our unemployment rate today is at the lowest rate it has ever been in the history of our state. The lowest rate it's ever been in the history of our state. Now, we've still got a lot to work on because unemployment rates, while a number worth looking at, is an imperfect number because it doesn't always take into account those individuals that are not in the workforce that should be. And we've got to figure out ways to improve the workforce participation rate in our state. But clearly, there's a dichotomy in this country today amongst and between those states that are run by red states and blue states.
So, I mean, people thought it was controversial to keep businesses open as much as you did, but it was not nearly as controversial as your decision in May of last year to end unemployment bonuses. Yet, you saw we had a labor shortage, we were struggling, you made that decision that we're going to end unemployment bonuses. We were one of the first states to come out to do that, and we had a spike in hiring like we had never seen before, the largest in a single month in the history of the state. How did you know that was going to help more people than it hurt?
Well, like so many things in the pandemic, we didn't know, but we believe very strongly that the best way to get our economy rolling again was to get our employees back in the workforce. It was controversial at the time. We were one of the first states in America to do it. And it's the reason that I wanted to make sure that we did the work on the back end to get the data to confirm as to whether or not we made a good decision or a bad decision. The people deserve to know that. And there were those, not only in our state, that were detractors, but there were those around the country that said, oh my goodness, I can't believe that you're doing this. But here's the data. The FGA did an analysis, and in the month of June, as Grant said, our hiring was the largest hiring month in the history of our state. But the real data is even more impressive than that. We saw an additional 72,000 Mississippians re-enter the workforce in the month of June of 2021. That 72,000 number not only is the largest month in our state's history, it would have been the largest year in our state's history, and we did it in 1 month once those enhanced unemployment benefits went away. And so the jobs were available, and the people of Mississippi, some of whom were making an economic decision, made that decision to go back into the workforce. And it's one of the reasons that from a policy standpoint, we have to continue to look for ways to grow the number of people in the workforce, because the reality is where we find ourselves today is in much better shape than where we were in June or May of 2021. But the challenges are not wholly different in that we need more people in the workforce. In the old days, we used to have a whole lot of people looking for jobs. Nowadays, we have a whole lot of jobs looking for people. And we've got to do everything we can to encourage and incentivize those individuals to get back in the workforce so that they can continue to help see our economy grow.
And I love that you mentioned a minute ago, we certainly need it as a state. And a lot of times we talk about work as something that the state needs, our communities need. But as humans, we need work. Like, having work is one of the things that provides purpose and meaning and gets you out of bed in the morning and gives you fulfillment because you're using your God-given gifts. So when you think about barriers to work and the obstacles, we talk a lot about red tape and regulations and even things like occupational licensing. What role do you think scaling back some of those things can help pull more people into the workforce?
Well, I think that's certainly, I think all of the above. In many of these questions, the natural tendency is to go to either or, right? Either we do this or we do that. In our case, and particularly when it revolves around a topic that we talk a lot about in the governor's office, which is, government's role is not really to create jobs. Government's role is not really to get you to go to work. Government's role is to remove those roadblocks, to remove those speed bumps, to make it easier for individuals to make that decision. And so the reality is there are a large number of things that we have to continue to focus on. The occupational licensing reform is a prime example wherein we as a state have made tremendous progress. We started that when I was lieutenant governor, and Speaker Gunn was Speaker of the House at the time, and Governor Bryant was governor at the time. We started that process, and we're continuing to improve upon it each and every legislative session and each and every day. And so the easier we make it for people to enter the workforce, the better. The other thing that we have to recognize, and this is where I think probably we've made more progress in a short period of time than in any other, and that is in the improvement of our workforce development, workforce training delivery system. So in my view, here's the reality. There are a certain number of government benefits that are provided mostly by the federal government for those who do not have work, those who are not currently employed. And that level, obviously, over the last 12 years or so has steadily increased. There's a segment of our population in Mississippi, and there's a segment of the population in every state in America, wherein their skill set is such that the kind of jobs that are available to them pay a level that is not significantly higher than that which they can earn or receive by not working. And so there's a couple of things that can be done to change that dichotomy. So what I would argue is some of those individuals are actually making an economic decision to not enter the workforce because the difference, the delta, if you will, between working and not working is relatively low. So there are two ways to fix that, right? You can bring that delta, or you can bring that number down, what they can receive for not working, and that's largely federal benefits, and we don't have a significant impact on that in a lot of ways. Or you can figure out a way to try to have a workforce development system wherein they can go and learn a skill such that that skill that they now have pays at a level that warrants, all other things being equal, warrants higher pay and leads to a reason for them to re-enter the workforce. And so we're working very hard on that second piece, on improving our workforce development or workforce delivery system. And I think we've made tremendous progress with the passage of legislation, working with our friends in the legislature, the passage of legislation creating what ultimately became Accelerate Mississippi, the overseeing of what is now approximately $375 million a year that's spent on workforce development, workforce training in Mississippi. My argument has always been we don't necessarily have to spend more money. We just need to spend what we got more efficiently and make sure we're focusing on the things that we need to focus on.
Yeah, so I think some of the folks from Accelerate are here.
Great.
So
thank y'all for the job you're doing, because you're really making a difference in the overall economy of our state.
What about this session? A lot of the conversation was around the elimination of the income tax. How does that factor into work and workforce participation and pulling people into work?
Well, I think the long term, the elimination of the income tax is a goal that I certainly have, and one that is shared by many, not all, but many of those in our legislative leadership, and it's one that I think is can have a profound impact on changing the long-term economic prospects for our state. Now, let's first of all brag on what we were able to accomplish this year. There are 9 states in America that have no income tax. Of the 41 that do have an income tax, Mississippi now has the 5th lowest marginal tax rate of the other 41 states. So we have the 14th lowest income tax rate in America. That's not a bad spot to be. It's not good enough, but it's not a bad spot to be. And in addition to that, I'll tell you that the starting point, or that point at which individuals start to get taxed on any income that is made, now for a married couple, that is $36,600, which is the highest number of any of those 41 states that have an income tax. And so what we were able to do is we were not only able to lower the highest marginal rate down to 4%, we also now have the largest exclusion for that income, so that obviously benefits those on the lower end of the income scale the most. Both of those are excellent talking points and something that we as a state should be proud of. But I believe we should push further. We should continue to push to eliminate the income tax in our state for a number of reasons, one of which is obviously, I believe very strongly, that government has nothing that it doesn't first take from someone else. And the reality is, if you want more of something, the way to get more of something is to incentivize more of it. The way to incentivize more income is to tax it less. And so the other point I would just simply make is you don't have to be a geography major to figure out that if you look at Texas to our west, Florida to our east, and Tennessee to our north, all of which are no-income states, all 3 of which have significant economic growth as well as significant population growth, that people across America are moving to low-tax states, and they're specifically moving to no-income tax states. And I think that Mississippi is well-positioned to take advantage of that. And oh, by the way, for those that feel like government ought to spend at a minimum what we already spend, current year that we're in, current fiscal year, the expected revenue when put into place just 14 months ago was $5,920 million. We only spend 98% of our expected revenue, so our total operating budget for this fiscal year, when it was initially passed, was approximately $5.8 billion. In the month of May, which ended yesterday or the day before, I forget exactly what day today is, we collected $190 million more in the month of May than was originally projected for that month. Year to date, which is we have 11 of our 12-month fiscal year completed, year to date, we've collected $1.3 billion more than was originally projected. And so we're going to collect, remember, original revenue was $5.9 billion. We're going to collect somewhere between $7.25 and $7.5 billion this year. That's $1.5 billion approximately over and above what was originally projected, and that's after last year when we collected over $1 billion more than we were projected. The reality is, if you incentivize work and people go back to work, if you tax it less, incomes go up, revenues to individuals go up. What do we all do? We spend more. Revenues to the state ultimately go up as well because the economy grows. And that's what we're seeing in our state right now. And I want to continue to see that continue.
Well, I was told I wouldn't have to do any math, so I'm glad you're doing all the math today. But that is, it's truly extraordinary. And I think it's a demonstration of policies that have been passed that will lead to greater economic growth. So when you think about not just what's been done, last question, when you think about where we're headed, what are you most optimistic about?
Well, I will tell you, I'm extremely optimistic about Mississippi's future. And the reason I'm extremely optimistic, and I don't know that I can narrow it down to any one item, but I do think it's important to note this in this crowd because I want you to know it. For years and years and years in Mississippi, our opponents, both inside our state and outside our state, have constantly pointed towards the fact, and you've heard it your whole life, Mississippi has the worst education system in the nation. Mississippi has the worst education system in the nation. And perhaps up until about 10 years ago, people could say that and at least have some data points to point to justify their position. I would have argued it wasn't true 10 years ago, but today our opponents can still say that, but they're lying to you. There is no data justification for Mississippi as last in the nation in public education. In fact, quite the contrary. Every data point points towards a significantly improving pre-kindergarten through 12th grade educational system in Mississippi. If you look at overall results, there are two different services that rank states. Mississippi ranks 32nd and 35th in the nation in overall public educational systems. So when the other side says we're last in the nation, no, we're not. It's just not true. But here's some more data points. If you look at the NAEP testing, that's the nation's report card. In each of the last 3 years, in aggregate, Mississippi has been number one in the nation in 10-year growth numbers when combined for fourth grade reading and math, 8th grade reading and math. When you look at high school graduation rates, when I ran for lieutenant governor and was sworn in, the high school graduation rate nationally was 84.5%. Mississippi's was 72.5%. Last year, the national average rose from, over that 10 years, from 84.5% to 86.5%. Mississippi's gone from 72% high school graduation rate to 88.5%. We are above the national average. So we have the highest high school graduation rate in the history of the state, and we have the lowest dropout rate in the history of our state, and we exceed the national average in both. And so I tell you all that to say educational reforms and educational investments work. And when you push for results, Mississippians do exactly what we would expect. Mississippians rise up and they meet those increased expectations. And that's what's happening all throughout our state in the K through 12 world. And I couldn't be prouder to watch our administrators, our teachers step up and do exactly that. And so what gives me the most optimism is what really is going to be the hardest thing that we do, and that is not settling for where we are today. 50th wasn't good enough 10 years ago. My friends, 35th isn't good enough today. We need to focus on moving from 35th to 30th, from 30th to 25th. Let's continue to show that accountability measures work. Let's continue to show that smart, strategic investments work. And let's, for those of us that fit into this category, for those of us who are conservatives, recognize that we believe in rewarding success. And so with the teacher pay raise that's going into effect, we are rewarding those teachers who've helped us move from 50th to 35th over the last 10 years and saying, hey, let's continue to work together to continue to improve. Because in the long run, again, it's all about workforce. And if we continue to improve K through 12, continue to improve our delivery systems and our delivery mechanisms for workforce development, workforce training, we're going to have the workforce which is going to encourage and incentivize more capital investment in our state, which is going to lead to more jobs in our state, which is going to lead to more economic prosperity in our state.
Yeah. Much to celebrate.